Welcome to Wichita Liberty TV with Bob Weeks.
Hello, I'm Bob Weeks for Wichita Liberty TV, your weekly source for news, analysis, and commentary about Wichita and Kansas government and public policy. We're broadcast on KGPT, channel 26.1, also its companion website, kgbt286.com. Some of you may know me for my blog, The Voice for Liberty, that's on the internet at wichitaliberty.org. The motto there is individual liberty, limited government, and free markets in Wichita and Kansas. So, I cover things that may not be covered by the Wichita Eagle or other TV stations or radio. Or if we do cover the same news, I'll do it from the perspective of economic freedom, limited government, and individual liberty, because these are the things that are important, and these are the things that are so often under attack by our governments, be it at the federal, state, or local level. So, please visit wichitaliberty.org. You can subscribe to the email newsletter I send a couple times a week. If you'd like to contact me, my email address is there, or just remember, bob.weeks@gmail.com. A proposed entertainment district in Old Town Wichita benefits a concentrated area but spreads costs across everyone while also creating a potential for abuse. Well, that's what's going to happen this week when the Wichita City Council considers forming an entertainment district covering Greater Old Town. The purpose of the new law, according to city documents, is to help control crime in the area. Current law enforcement efforts are not effective, declares the proposed statute, which says, whereas the occurrence of criminal activity in the Old Town Entertainment District and areas adjacent thereto continues to occur despite law enforcement's increased efforts and presence within the district. Well, some of the features of the proposed law are a mandatory fine of $500 for certain crimes if they occur within the Old Town Entertainment District, and also the ability to map or prohibit offenders from entering the Old Town Entertainment District. You can be banned. And the punishment for repeat offenses escalates rapidly. And to be able to control the behavior of Wichitans with fine granularity, the proposed ordinance contains definitions of art and fine art and art gallery. Oh, the capacity of a coffee shop cannot be over 100 people. And an entertainment establishment is not a place that holds book readings and storytelling. Well, I've been to a few book readings that were certainly not entertaining, but nonetheless. Now, while Wichita civic leaders proclaim this ordinance as a step forward, let's examine a few points. Recall that Old Town was built using millions in taxpayer subsidy both on and off the books. Although the tax increment financing district has ended, subsidy still flows to Old Town. An example of off-the-books subsidy is the large police presence required to keep Old Town relatively safe. And city documents hint at this, as in this excerpt from the agenda report for Tuesday's City Council meeting, which states, crime statistics reveal that crime overall has decreased in Old Town due to higher police presence. And in 2008, Wichita Police Chief Norman Williams was quoted as saying, as Old Town changed from a warehouse district to an entertainment district, it has presented a tremendous challenge to public safety. And in 2006, the Wichita Eagle reported on the level of policing required in Old Town, noting, beginning Friday night, police will put 2 officers on horseback in Old Town and have as many as 6 more officers walking through the entertainment district. He said, currently, around the bar's closing time, about a dozen officers patrol the area. Now, I don't know how much it costs per hour to have a Wichita police officer working, but it's substantial, I'm sure. And multiply that by many officers, and we're talking about real money. And these challenges of policing entertainment districts are well known and not unique to Wichita's Old Town. And the extra costs of the policing are known too. 2 examples, and others are easy to find, are these. There's a newspaper article from Arizona this year has the headline, Policing Costs Exceed Scottsdale Bar District's Revenue. And the article says the annual cost for policing downtown Scottsdale's entertainment district far exceeds the amount of revenue generated from the high concentration of bars in the area, according to city figures. Then, a Connecticut newspaper reports with its headline, Police asking bars to pay extra for security. And the article says, faced with a budget deficit, the Hartford Police Department is asking some downtown bars and restaurants to help pay the overtime costs for police officers assigned to maintain order in the city's entertainment district during the busiest nights of the week, when large crowds of partygoers pose the most risk for public safety threats. So, in Wichita, as across the country, these special entertainment districts require a lot of police attention at a high cost. And despite the extra costs of policing Old Town, at least one of its property owners who has received millions in taxpayers' subsidy still thought his taxes were too high, and he appealed them. Successfully, I might add. And another Old Town merchant sought and received a no-interest and low-interest loan from the city when his business was failing, despite having already received taxpayer subsidy. Well, there's something else. There's potential loss of liberties. Special districts like that proposed for Old Town give police more power. And with that comes increased potential for abuse. In Kansas City, the Power and Light District has been involved in lawsuits alleging racial discrimination. The dress code there is alleged to be targeted against young urban black men. In Wichita's Old Town, citizen activist Mike Schatz has covered some past incidents there, and on this proposed ordinance he notes that, like most of the laws in Old Town that govern the behavior of the patrons, it is expected that these new ordinances, if passed, would be primarily enforced outside the few bars that still cater to a primarily minority crowd. And on the potential for racially discriminatory application of laws, Schatz writes, anyone familiar with police activity in this district knows it will be the black men who are targeted by these new laws, and the rest statistics will prove it. Also, he wrote, white people, on the other hand, can actually get into full-on fistfights in front of police officers without repercussions, as I and other activists witnessed outside the Pump House, that's a bar in Old Town District, while investigating Old Town policing activities last year. Well, shouldn't we take a step back for a moment and ask, just what have we done in Wichita? Does the need for special police power and special penalties in Old Town demonstrate that we've created something that we really don't want? And will Wichitans across the city be forced to pay for extra police that benefit a concentrated area of town and it alone? Well, along with the establishment of the entertainment district with its special laws, we could also ask that the property owners in that district absorb its extra costs. The district is defined in the proposed statute. It would be a simple matter to identify the properties in the district and add something extra to the property tax bills. Something like this is already done to support the Wichita Downtown Development Corporation with funds to promote economic development. Now, if that can be done, it's not unreasonable for Wichitans to ask that Old Town tax itself to pay for its unique costs. But laws like the Entertainment District Ordinance are usually tied to powerful economic interests who lobby the government for special protections. That is a problem identified and studied in public choice economics, as we've discussed before on Wichita Liberty TV. And that is the problem of concentrated benefits and dispersed costs. The entertainment district and the extra costs of policing are very beneficial to Old Town merchants and residents. And if they can obtain this benefit by having the cost spread across the entire city, well, that's a pretty good deal for them. But not so good for the average person who doesn't own a business in Old Town that profits from the people that cause law enforcement problems. And as the Wichita City Council routinely votes in favor of special interests as opposed to the public good, we can expect that the Council will fully embrace this new example of special laws created for special people and special interest groups. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. We hear government leaders in Wichita often likening government decision-making to running a business, but there are important differences. And this is especially important as Wichita considers the future of its economy, in which a larger role for government is contemplated. The views of the people leading this effort to expand government management of the local economy are important to explore. Consider Greater Wichita Economic Development Coalition Chairman Gary Schmidt, who is also an executive at Intrust Bank. Following is an excerpt from the minutes of the May 22, 2013 meeting of the Board of Sedgwick County Commissioners. Now, you may be thinking that this meeting, as it was held a year ago, is old news. But at the time of this meeting, Schmidt was vice chair of GWEDEC, and the meeting gives us insight into his thinking and, more broadly, the thinking of many of Wichita's leaders. Well, the topic of the day was a forgivable loan to Starwood Hotels and Resorts worldwide. These forgivable loans are equivalent to a cash grant as long as conditions are met. And this discourse shows the value of elected officials like Carl Peterjohn and also Richard Ranzaw, as he too contributed to the understanding of this matter. And when Michael O'Donnell served on the Wichita City Council, he also contributed in this way. Well, here's what Gary Schmidt of GWEDEC told the commissioners based on the meeting minutes. He said, "I know at the bank where I work, if we had $1 invested and got a return of over $2.40, we would consider that a very good investment in the future." And shortly after that, he said, "Very similar to what we do at the bank when we negotiate loan amounts or rates. So it is very much a business decision to try to figure out how to bring 900 jobs to our community without overspending or overcommitting." Well, there's a few problems here. First of all, when the bank that Schmidt works for makes a loan, there are several forces in play that are not present in government. And perhaps the most obvious difference is that a bank loans money and expects to be repaid. In the case of the forgivable loan the Sedgwick County Commission was considering, the goal is that the loan is not repaid. These loans, remember, are a grant of cash subject to a few conditions. And if the recipient company is required to repay the loan, it's because they did not meet conditions such as job count or capital investment. And in these circumstances, the company is probably not performing well economically and therefore may not be able to repay the loan. Well, another example of how a bank is different from government is that at a bank, both parties enter the loan transaction voluntarily. The bank's shareholders and depositors are voluntary participants. Well, maybe not explicitly for each loan, but if I do not like the policies or loans my bank has made, I can easily move my shares and deposits to another bank. But for these government loans, I personally have appeared several times before government bodies asking that the loan not be made. So I did not consent. And of course, changing government is much more difficult than changing banks. Well, another difference between Schmidt's bank and government is that a bank's goal is to earn a profit. Government doesn't calculate profit. It is not able to, and when it tries, its efforts fall short. For one thing, government conscripts its capital. It faces no market test as to whether it is making good investments. It doesn't have to compete with other institutions for capital, as a private bank does. It was Ludwig von Mises who taught us that government can't calculate profit and loss, the essential measure that lets us know if a business is making efficient use of resources. And Thomas D. Lorenzo elaborated, writing, "There is no such thing as real accounting in government, of course, since there are no profit and loss statements, only budgets. Consequently, there is no way of ever knowing, in an accounting sense, whether government is adding value or destroying it." Well, governments locally do have a measure of what they consider to be profit. It's the benefit-cost ratio calculated by the Center for Economic Development and Business Research, or CEDBR, at Wichita State University. This is the source of the $1 invested and get a return of over $2.40 that Schmidt referenced. But we have to realize that the benefits that go into this calculation are quite different from the profits that business firms attempt to earn. Most importantly, the benefits that government claims are not really benefits. Instead, they come in the form of additional tax revenue paid to government. And that's very different from the profits that companies earn voluntarily through market transactions. And government usually claims that in order to get these benefits, the incentives must be paid. But often the new economic activity, expansion, whatever, it would have happened anyway without the incentives. There is much evidence that economic development incentives rank low on the list of factors that businesses consider when making investments. And a related observation is that if the relatively small investment government makes in incentives is solely or even partially responsible for such wonderful outcomes in terms of jobs, why doesn't government do this more often? If the Sedgwick County Board of Commissioners has such power to create economic growth, why is anyone unemployed? Well, those like Gary Schmidt, who are preparing to lead Wichita's efforts in stimulating its economy, they believe that government should take on a larger role. We need to make sure that these leaders understand the fundamental differences between government and business and how government can and can't help business grow. Welcome back to Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks. As Wichita struggles with its needs, both real and imagined, we're going to be told that the only option is a sales tax increase, or maybe some other tax. I really don't know. But look at this. The street lights illustrated in these recent photographs are competing very strongly with the sun to illuminate Wichita streets in the middle of a few very sunny days. Undoubtedly, these examples of waste represent a small portion of the city's spending. But you don't have to look very hard to find waste like this. And we know that small examples of waste are multiplied many times. So when city leaders tell us that there is nowhere left to cut in the budget, that everything that can be done to trim the fat has already been done, and that the only thing we can do is raise taxes, well, think of these photographs. Now, this is not to say that waste like this does not occur in the private sector. Of course it does. But businesses and individuals have a powerful incentive to avoid waste that is not present in government. And that is, businesses and people are spending their own money. The government bureaucrats in charge of these streetlights are spending someone else's money within a system where there is no profit motive and little fear of losses, and correspondingly little accountability. Well, burning streetlights unneedlessly in the middle of the day is a small problem. But here's a really big problem. Wichita government leaders complain that Wichita can't compete in economic development with other cities and states because the budget for incentives is too small. But when making this argument, these officials are not including all the available incentives that we have. Now, last week, the Wichita City Council was presented with a plan for a fund to create jobs. And the document was titled, "Will Wichita Accelerate Competition for Primary Jobs? Time for a Community Discussion." But this document contains contradictory information about the money that is available for economic development incentives in Wichita. Now, the usual argument that officials make is represented by this quotation from the report, which is, Wichita and Sedgwick County compete conservatively with incentives. The city of Wichita and Sedgwick County have a total of $1.65 million a year in new uncommitted funds for cash incentives, with any unused money going back to the general fund. That's good. But the very same report contains this. The $4.5 million peak program incentive from the Kansas Department of Commerce was an important factor in keeping NetApp in Wichita. Locally, we were able to provide $836,000 incentives. So, with an incentives budget of $1.65 million, a Wichita company received $5.3 million in incentives. Now, some of this, like the peak incentive, is paid over a period of years. But that doesn't begin to describe the benefits NetApp received. I obtained a letter to NetApp from the Kansas Department of Commerce that laid out the potential benefits from the state of Kansas. And as detailed in that letter, the programs and potential dollar amounts are, well, there was the peak of up to $7.7 million. There's some industrial training grants of up to $160,000, sales tax savings of $6.8 million, personal property tax exemption worth $11.9 million, and high performance incentive program credits of $8.5 million, the total of that being $35 million. Some of these are paid not upfront, but over a period of years. The peak benefits, for example, are payable over 7 years according to the letter, so that's about $1.1 million a year. These also represent potential benefits the company may not actually qualify for and receive this entire amount, but it's what the state offered. And it's true now that some of these programs, strictly speaking, are not cash incentives of the type Wichita complains of lacking. But if a company is going to make purchases, and the state says you can skip paying the sales tax on the purchase, well, that's about as good as cash, and almost $7 million of cash in the case of NetApp, according to the Kansas Chamber of Commerce. Well, besides sales tax exemptions, the city has other types of tax exemptions it regularly offers. These exemptions can have substantial value. In 2008, as Drury contemplated purchasing the Broadview Hotel in downtown Wichita, the city allowed the hotel to escape paying much of the taxes that the rest of us have to pay. According to city information, Drury planned to spend about $23 million on the hotel. Well, a rough calculation tells us that the hotel will save on that property about $700,000 per year in tax payments. And remember, city officials complain of an incentives budget of only $1.65 million per year. And when Boeing announced in 2012 that it was closing its Wichita operations, city leaders complained that Boeing was leaving even though it had received many incentives from Wichita. From 1979 to 2007, Boeing received tax abatements through the industrial revenue bond process worth $658 million, according to a compilation provided by the city of Wichita. And at the time, city officials said the average amount of bonds was about $120 million per year. With Wichita commercial property tax rates at slightly over 3% of appraised value, according to GWEDEC, that's a tax savings of around $3.6 million per year. And to Boeing, that's as good as receiving cash year after year. And remember, city officials say the incentives budget is only $1.65 million per year. Well, there's more. In 2013, Wichita approved a package benefiting Exchange Place in downtown. The city agenda packet told us that the project qualified for $12.5 million in tax increment financing. TIF, or tax increment financing, diverts future increased tax revenues away from the normal uses and diverts them back to the project. In this case, the city will borrow the $12.5 million by selling bonds. It will give this money to the developers, and then TIF proceeds will be used to repay these bonds. Now, some argue that TIF is not really an incentive. The owners of the property will have to pay their personal property taxes just like any other property owner. But for this project, the property taxes are used for the project's own benefit instead of paying for city government. In other words, this project gets to spend $12.5 million of its property tax payments on itself, rather than having those payments fund the cost of Wichita city government. And remember, Wichita city officials say the incentives budget is only $1.65 million per year. Well, there's more. The Ambassador Hotel in downtown Wichita received many incentives, including $3.8 million in tax credits from the state of Kansas and $3.5 million in tax credits from the United States government. All told, this project was slated to receive about $15 million in taxpayer funds to get started, with additional funds provided annually. The tax credits that the Ambassador Hotel received are historic preservation tax credits. They have the same economic impact as a cash payment. The federal tax credits are available across the country, while the Kansas tax credits, of course, are a Kansas state program. But in this case, the hotel developers received an upfront payment of $3.8 million from the state of Kansas in a form that's just as good as cash. Remember, city officials say the incentives budget is only $1.65 million per year. Well, there's more. Last year, according to city documents, a Star Bonds district in northeast Wichita was approved to receive $31.5 million from these bonds. The Star Bonds are paid off with sales tax revenue that would otherwise go to the state and overlapping jurisdictions like Sedgwick County and the city of Wichita. This is sales tax revenue collected from the business customers and doesn't cost the business anything. Remember, city officials say the incentives budget is only $1.65 million per year. Well, there's even more. The list is not complete. There are other programs and other beneficiaries of economic development subsidies. It's important for citizens to know that, contrary to the claims of officials, Wichita has many economic development incentive programs available, and some have substantial value to the recipients with corresponding cost to the city and other jurisdictions. The $1.65 million that city officials talk about is simply the tip of the iceberg and not an honest representation of the incentives that Wichita can give to companies. Well, thank you for watching this episode of Wichita Liberty TV. I'm Bob Weeks.